Welcome. It is Verdict with Ted Cruz, Weekend Review. Ben Ferguson with you. And here are the stories that you may have missed that we talked about this week. First up, Iran and where we are now in the politics of this deal. Could we get a deal done? And how much does this have to do with national security? We break it down for you. Also, we have got a shocking story coming out of Minnesota that the governor there actually paid private investigators to spy and to intimidate government employees who had whistleblown on the massive fraud that was taking place. And finally, the Trump administration going all out to find children that were released into the country after they came across the southern border. And these children are missing by the hundreds of thousands. So who have they found? Well, it's an incredible story. We have that for you as well. It's the Weekend Review, and it starts right now. All right, let's timestamp this. It is 12:37 a.m. Eastern time as we are recording right now, Senator. And so let's talk about what's happening right now in the Middle East. We have had a flare-up. I think it's a fair way to put it. Israel involved, Iran involved, hitting terrorist targets as well in Lebanon. This has turned into a bigger deal. The president trying to still get this deal done with Iran, making phone calls apparently to Bibi Netanyahu saying, hey, let's not go too heavy here. Let us see if we can keep this framework together, trying to keep that ceasefire together as well. There's an awful lot happening right now.
Well, let's talk about the latest news. And as you noted, it is Sunday night, so things could break by Monday. By the time this podcast is out, we could have more news breaking. But as of right now, the latest news, Axios reported just a few minutes ago, quote, the Israeli Air Force conducted strikes on military targets in central and western Iran on Monday morning local time, the Israel Defense Forces said in a statement. The strikes, in retaliation for an Iranian missile attack against Israel, mark a new phase in a growing escalation that started on Sunday morning. This is the first time Israel has struck Iran since the April 8 ceasefire. Further exchanges of fire could unravel the negotiations between the United States and Iran and lead to the resumption of the war. President Trump told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hours before the strikes not to retaliate after Tehran conducted a retaliatory attack on Israel. A U.S. defense official said the U.S. military was not involved in the Israeli strikes on Iran. The official said the Israeli strikes were relatively limited in their scope. So we have returned to firing missiles, active hostility between Iran and Israel. Both have fired missiles at each other in the past 24 hours. That certainly has the potential to escalate. And also Sunday morning, President Trump was on Meet the Press. He was asked about Iran. Here's what President Trump had to say.
Their leaders are gone.
Do you know where all of Iran's nuclear material is?
Yes.
Sir?
Yes.
Would you unfreeze any Iranian assets or lift any sanctions up front as a part part of any deal? So that would come after.
Comes after, yeah. If they behave,
turned
if they
over
do a good
their
job, we
nuclear
start
enrichment
talking,
material.
Unlike Obama. Obama flew a Boeing 757, a plane I know very well. They took the seats out and they loaded it up with $1.7 billion in cash from the banks in Maryland and Virginia and D.C. They emptied out the banks, and they gave them 1.7 in green, and they gave them tens of billions of dollars, just kept giving them money, and it didn't work.
Would any, again,
that never works.
But again, Mr. President, you promised that you were going to negotiate a better deal. Do you wish
You listen to the president there, and I do think it's really interesting to see how quick on Meet the Press they wanted to get back in his face to go, but this is a disaster. Like, he's like, it's 3 months. Like, what I'm doing right now is really tough. Others said they were in favor of what I'm doing. They didn't do it the way I'm doing it. I'm holding them accountable. This goes back to just perspective here, I think, is the biggest thing the president's saying.
Well, what the president said that is very clear is he's drawn a red line, and he's insisting that Iran comply with his red line. His red lines, which we've talked about at length, are number one, no nukes, no nuclear materials. They have no nuclear enrichment, and they have to hand over the enriched uranium they have. Number two, they have to stop funding terrorism. Number three, they have to open the Strait of Hormuz. And you will not see, he has said, sanctions relief. You will not see money going to them until they comply with those conditions. That's the right way to negotiate. Both Barack Obama and Joe Biden just flooded billions into Iran. As the president said, Obama literally flew a plane filled with almost $2 billion in cash, pallets of cash, into Iran in the dead of night. There was another exchange President Trump had with Meet the Press. Give a listen to this one.
And they would have had a nuclear weapon 5 years ago.
But, Mr. President, I'm curious, because when you were campaigning, you said you would rip up the Iran nuclear deal, but negotiate a better deal. Why didn't you negotiate a better deal at the time? Because after it was ripped up, there weren't guardrails, and they escalated their production of enriched uranium.
Excuse me. It takes years to do these things. These people have been fighting for 47 years. They've been killing Americans. They've been taking off their legs and their arm, and their faces have been hurt so badly and so horribly. I'm moving very fast. I'm into 3 months. You know, Vietnam lasted 19 years. I'm into my 3rd month, and all I do is say, whoa, when are you going to win? If I were a Democrat, nobody would be talking that way, but it doesn't matter to me. I've gotten so used to it. Look, we have totally destroyed their military. They have some missiles left. They have some drones left.
Do you know how many missiles?
Yes, exactly.
How many?
I don't want to tell you.
Can you give me a ballpark?
But they have some left. But I know almost to the number, and we know where they are too, and we know where their drones are, and we know where their drone factories are. Most of the drone factories have been knocked out. Most of the launching pads have been knocked out, and most of the missile manufacturing areas have been knocked out. But they still have capacity. They have some missiles. They have some drones. I would say percentage-wise, maybe 21, 22% of their missiles. It's a lot of missiles, but it's not what it was when we first attacked.
So you're saying they have 21, 22% of their missiles left?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
I got to say, I laugh at how they want him to tell them information. He's like, I'm not going to tell you that publicly. Well, why won't you? Because I'm not going to tell the enemy what I know on everything. This seems pretty normal, yet the entire interview had that level of hostility in it.
Yeah, look, I mean, NBC, unfortunately, it is approaching this, and it has approached this like the rest of the corporate media, with effectively rooting for the United States to lose. As the president laid out, the United States has had extraordinary military results in this conflict. 80% of the missiles, 80% of the drones destroyed, virtually all of the drone manufacturing and missile capacity destroyed, the Air Force in rubble, the Navy sunken at the bottom of the ocean, the Ayatollah dead, many of the mullahs dead, many of the leaders of the IRGC dead. And her question, she says, well, why didn't you negotiate a better deal? I'm listening to that wondering, it's like someone saying to the police, why didn't you negotiate a better deal with Charles Manson? Why didn't you negotiate a better deal with Jeffrey Dahmer? Why didn't you negotiate a better deal with Ted Bundy? It is not possible to negotiate a deal with someone whose only objective is to murder you.
Yep.
And the media refuses to acknowledge that. They're like, the right solution is send them billions of dollars. That's what Democrats want.
Appeasement.
It is complete appeasement. It is denial of the reality that when the Ayatollah says death to America, he means it. And the reason President Trump is waging this war is because if the Ayatollah got nuclear weapons, we could see hundreds of thousands of Americans murdered in a flash of an eye. And the president is not going to let that happen. And it is, I got to say, by the way, I'm quite confident the folks at NBC News are cheering the results of the LA mayor's race because the last thing they want is a mayor that can actually put out fires or arrest criminals.
Now, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you can go back and listen to the full podcast from earlier this week. Now on to story number 2. All right, I want to move on to this other incredible story, Senator, coming out of Minnesota. And in life, especially in government work, you're told that if you're a whistleblower, that you have protections. And that if you're a whistleblower, you should not be afraid for your job or that someone's going to come after you, certainly the government that you work for. Well, apparently that's not the case in Minnesota. And if you want to know how the Somali fraud got so bad, it might actually be because the governor was coming after the whistleblower, not those that were committing the crimes in Minnesota, with his new shocking report.
Well, that is inevitably, number one, the law, federal law and typically state law that protects whistleblowers, that gives you legal protection because you want whistleblowers to call attention to fraud. But number two, if a government official goes after the whistleblowers, attacks the whistleblowers, refuses to follow the law and whistleblowers, that is powerful indication of a guilty mind, that you're covering something up. It's sort of like if someone is murdered in Central Park and you catch a person burning their clothes from that night and destroying the murder weapon.
Yeah.
That is powerful evidence that they're the murderer. That it is typically the guilty who destroys evidence, who tries to cover it up. That if you're not guilty, you have far less motivation, far less likelihood to try to silence whistleblowers, to try to destroy evidence. So here's the story that broke in the Daily Caller. The headline is, Tim Walz's staff hired private investigators to silence fraud whistleblowers. Committee report finds. Senior Minnesota state officials allegedly hired outside investigators to silence whistleblowers in an attempt to cover up widespread state social services fraud, a House committee report released Monday found. The 200-page staff report by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform found that Democrat Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's state's administration intimidated and retaliated against state employees who raised concerns about fraud, soliciting private investigators to reveal employees' personal details.
Wow.
The report, titled The Cost of Doing Nothing, How Tim Walz and Keith Ellison Fueled Minnesota's Fraud Explosion, exposed that senior state officials, as high as allegedly Governor Waltz, were aware of widespread fraud for years and neglected to respond to reports. A Minnesota Department of Education official who contacted the FBI told federal investigators she was pressured, quote, at every turn by her superiors to stop raising fraud concerns and was, quote, hand-slapped when she continued to investigate, according to the report. The official also reported that she was warned by state administrators to, quote, stop digging into things as it would appear that she was, quote, targeting certain groups. This is DEI and fraud all coming together, along with corruption to elect Democrats. The article continues. Dozens of other whistleblowers reported, that they were told to stay silent about fraud concerns by the Minnesota Department of Human Services because they would be labeled, quote, racist or Islamophobic. DHS also told state employees that raising fraud concerns would harm the state, the report said. Whistleblowers reported that DHS conducted arbitrary investigations to photograph their cars and houses, monitor their phones and computers, and asked employees where their kids attended school. Now it's going to get worse. Then temporary commissioner Shireen Gandhi, by the way, I'm going to give you some foreshadowing that Ms. Gandhi did not behave like Gandhi. Instead, she confirmed in a testimony copied in the report that the State Department used outside entities to conduct these investigations of employees, but could not confirm whether independent law firms were used. Gandhi also confirmed in her testimony that DHS management would regularly meet and, quote, check in on employees who had reported fraud concerns. Gandhi continued to conduct these check-ins on DHS whistleblower Faye Bernstein, quote, a year or two after her investigatory leave. So they hunted them down and they stayed harassing them. Bernstein alleged that Gandhi, quote, shamed her in a meeting after she raised concerns about fraud and, quote, excluded her from further meetings on the topic. Whistleblowers also alleged that former State Commissioner Jody Harpstead held a division-wide meeting and told attendees that, quote, employees would be punished if they reported concerns about fraud in DHS programs, according to the report. DHS employee Emmanuel Nwala told colleagues that he, quote, did intelligence research within the Army and appears to have threatened to provide IP addresses to former colleagues in order to find the locations of whistleblowers' email addresses an email obtained through a public data request showed. Now, it's about to get even worse. The report also alleged that DHS de-anonymized an internal fraud hotline for employees in an attempt to intimidate fraud reporters. After whistleblowers later created an anonymous external email to report fraud, DHS blocked the email address. Whistleblowers reported that their fraud hotline tips were sent to human resources and used against them. The hotline was originally anonymous, but was de-anonymized under Gandhi's tenure as Deputy Commissioner of HR. Governor Waltz appointed Gandhi as Commissioner of DHS in February 2026, but removed her in May before her confirmation hearing amid scrutiny of her response to fraud allegations. This is anyone who claims, gosh, the elected officials of Minnesota, they were victims. They didn't know. They wanted to go after the fraud, which, by the way, both Waltz and Ellison keep saying, oh, we wanted to go after the fraud. We wanted to prosecute it. This demonstrates, I think, powerfully, they are lying. Not only did they not want to go after the fraud, they were doing everything they could to silence the whistleblowers and prevent anyone from knowing about the fraud.
Yeah, and this goes back to the other question of accountability. If everything that we just mentioned turns out to be true, there's obviously now an open investigation into this. If you do these things, are you breaking the law? And if it goes all the way to the governor, is he breaking the law? And the people below him, are they breaking the law? And is there any accountability for this? Or is this just, well, Waltz isn't running for re-election, so it doesn't really matter anymore, and we'll just move on. And, yeah, we may continue to do things like this in the future without accountability.
Listen, the Department of Justice has created an entire new division focused at going after fraud. And I hope everyone who made these decisions faces accountability. If they committed criminal violations, that they are prosecuted. I am hopeful. I can tell you I'm urging the Department of Justice, hold them accountable. The way our constitutional system works, it's not the legislature. Look, I'm in the Senate. I can't prosecute anybody. I don't have executive authority. I have legislative authority. I can write legislation, which I have, but I can't. The power to bring an indictment, the power to go before a grand jury, to get an indictment, to prosecute, that is exclusively within the executive branch, within principally the U.S. Department of Justice at the federal level. And so I can tell you this, I am urging the Attorney General and DOJ prosecute every single person who committed criminal acts, who covered up this fraud, who benefited from it, who knew what they were doing, and this is a real smoking gun.
And if the AG, I go back to Ellison there, we know his name well. If he's involved in this and is using and weaponizing the government to go after those that were not committing the fraud, those that were trying to whistleblow on the fraud, and they are harassed, is there any lane for the people that were being harassed to somehow have, like, restitution for what they went through? If you're being harassed for 2 years after you put in a tip, that's got to put a lot of stress on your life. I'm assuming it puts stress on your career. I'm assuming it could have affected a lot of people getting promotions that they deserved.
Yeah, look, and I would assume we're going to see civil litigation of people filing lawsuits and seeking compensation for this, and that litigation could well be successful. In terms of criminal prosecution, this would not surprise me. I don't know sitting here if Minnesota law makes doing this a criminal violation in Minnesota. Now, of course, the federal government can't prosecute violations of Minnesota law. It would take a Minnesota district attorney to bring that case, and I got to admit, I'm very skeptical that there are any prosecutors in Minnesota willing to hold the corrupt Democrats in charge of that state accountable. If they're not, then there's not really a mechanism to enforce Minnesota law, which means you would be left with federal law. And given that these are federal funds that were effectively being stolen and funneled to Somalian fraudsters being sent among other places, to Al-Shabaab, and we've reported
terrorists.
before on this podcast that the single largest funder of Al-Shabaab, which is the radical Islamic terrorist group that is in Somalia, their number one funder was the taxpayers of Minnesota. And those are also federal taxpayer money. So, look, I expect the Department of Justice, they've already prosecuted a number of the fraudsters at the lower level, but I hope they go right up the ladder of accountability, and any politicians that are responsible. And to be clear, this happened because it was in politicians' political interest for this to happen, because they were getting money from campaign donations and they were getting votes from allowing Somalian fraudsters to rob the taxpayers of Minnesota and the American taxpayers. And look, this has happened also in other states. It's happened in Maine under the Democrat governor there. It's happened in California. It's happened in Illinois. It's happened, I think, all over the country, but predominantly in Democrat states where there are Democrat politicians who are benefiting from turning the other way to fraud. And I think everyone who committed a criminal act should face prosecution and real consequences.
As before, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation on this topic, you can go back and download the podcast from earlier this week to hear the entire thing. I want to get back to the big story, number 3 of the week, you may have missed. Senator, I want to move into another story that we highlighted here months ago. It's an important story about the children that were lost by the prior administration. There were kids that were let into this country. They were not vetted with the adults that were with them. They were then given out to different people to, quote, take care of them in this country, and they disappeared. These children, many of them have been abused. Many of them have been abused sexually. Many of them have been abused even in work conditions. And they were lost by the prior administration. And now, luckily, many of them are being found because of what Donald Trump and the administration are doing.
So perhaps the biggest lie about Joe Biden and the Democrats' immigration policies is the lie that they embrace open borders because of compassion. The reality is it is precisely the opposite. The Democrats had zero compassion for the Americans who were murdered by the violent, criminal, illegal aliens they released. They had zero compassion for the women who were raped by the violent, criminal, illegal aliens they released. They had zero compassion for the kids who were brutalized and sexually assaulted by the violent, criminal, illegal aliens they released. Another aspect of this tragedy is specifically the kids. During 4 years of Joe Biden's administration, the Biden administration lost over 300,000 children.
Yeah.
Verdict has covered this at length. This is a topic we talked about throughout the Biden years, but it was staggering. And these are kids, often kids that come across the border unaccompanied. We had over 12 million illegal immigrants come into this country during the Biden years. And in many instances, you'd get a little boy, you'd get a little girl, they'd be in government custody. And what the Biden administration would do is they would hand it over to adults that came to pick them up, but they wouldn't check to see if those adults were family members. They wouldn't do DNA tests to see if they're related. They'd hand them over to adults, and then they simply lost them. And they would end up with random adults that have kids, and the Biden administration said, we don't know where they are. We have no contact for them. And a significant number, we don't know how many, but a significant number of those kids were put into forced child labor. A significant number of those kids were put into sex slavery, were sexually abused. And no one in the Biden administration gave a damn. When Alejandro Mayorkas, who ran the Department of Homeland Security, would testify before the Senate, I would question him about it, and he was defiant. Well, thankfully, one of the very top priorities the Trump administration came in with is we're going to find those kids. And they've already found over 146,000 of them. They're still looking. I want you to listen to current DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullin at a press conference this week. Give a listen.
We're going to enforce our nation's laws, and we're going to right the wrongs that the Biden administration turned a blind eye to. It's because of President Trump's leadership. It's horrific to what's happening right in our own country because of 4 years of a blind eye that allowed unvetted sponsors to come pick up 450,000 kids on our borders, knowing their reports, why the Biden administration was in office, their own reports was reporting that over a third of the females, regardless of age, was sexually assaulted before they made it to their border. They knew it was human traffickers that were trafficking these young kids to the border, and then they were unvetting or refusing to vet the so-called sponsors, and there was zero wellness checks. And they want to claim that Republicans, because we're enforcing the laws, is inhumane somehow? What's inhumane about taking care of our kids? As a father of 6 with 3 young girls, I will do whatever I have to do. I will move heaven and hell to go find these kids.
You know, I love the commitment there, and I want to remind people of the vote center that have taken place, the Democrats. You had 145 Democrats that vote against mandating deportation for illegal aliens who commit sex crimes. You have 160 Democrats vote against mandating deportation for illegal aliens with DUIs. You have 186 Democrats who voted against mandating deportations for illegal aliens who commit welfare fraud. And you have 190 Democrats who voted against mandating deportation for illegal aliens who harm police animals. I think it's clear. Democrats have literally never met an illegal alien they're not willing to feed, protect, defend, and allow to then take children and unvet them. There's nothing they won't do to have an open border policy.
Yeah, look, that's right. And those votes were all in this past year. If you go back to during the Biden administration in the Senate, 100%, every single Senate Democrat voted in favor of open borders over and over and over again. We would tee up the votes. I led the fight on many of these, and the Democrats' straight party line would vote in favor of open borders. It was, and when you asked them about the kids, they didn't have a response. They don't dispute these figures. That they just don't talk about them, and it's. Look, I want you to listen to Secretary Mullen talking about the kids they found so far and what they're what they continue looking for.
You know, I tell people that I haven't quit smiling since I've been Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, but I have to take that back because when we start digging into these cases and you start hearing the absolute horrific things that took place underneath the Biden administration, under true neglect at best and criminal at worst, to allow 450,000 kids to go missing throughout this country. President Trump has made it a point to go find these kids. And because of our partnership with HHS and DOJ, Department of Homeland Security, truly using the best of the best, which the Democrats sometimes want to demonize because a lot of times this is ICE, this is HSI, this is CBP. These individuals that the Democrats seem to want to defund, but because of President Trump, we finally funded them for 3 years. We're able to push and go find these kids. We found 146,000 kids so far. 146,000 kids. We still have nearly 300,000 missing. We're investigating reports to where some of these kids claim that they were raped 600 to 700 times. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you have kids, if you don't have kids. I don't care if you're a liberal, you're independent, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican. If you can't stand for law enforcement to go find these kids, who are you? Who are you? Every leader should understand what's going on. And do you know where we're finding the most of them? Sanctuary cities, because they know they're safe.
If you think about sex trafficking at child center, you would go to a sanctuary city. That is the safest place for you to operate. You and I have talked about this bluntly.
Well, and it's worth explaining why. Because in a sanctuary city, you have Democrat elected officials, you have Democrat district attorneys who won't prosecute the human traffickers, who won't prosecute the sex traffickers, who have decided as a political matter that their party, the Democrat Party, is for open borders. You know, you remember Chris Murphy when he said on TV, the very liberal Democrat from Connecticut, he said, the people we care about most, illegal immigrants. That was his phrase, the people we care about most. And by the way, that's a lie also. He doesn't care about the little girls and little boys being raped and turned into sex slaves. He doesn't care about them at all. What he cares about is letting in as many illegal immigrants as possible who will then vote Democrat and keep the party in power. I want you to listen to Secretary Mullen making this point, that as there were multiple reports of kids being trapped in sex slavery, no Democrat gave a damn.
It was being reported at the time it was happening, and there was no outrage, and no one tried to hold these people accountable, and kids now have been paying for it. They've been getting raped over and over and over again because this previous administration chose not to enforce our nation's laws and protect the most vulnerable. That is shameful.
600 to 700 times. That is a number that I do believe should haunt everyone listening.
Yeah. Look. I want you to remember when Alejandro Mayorkas testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I showed him the plastic bracelets, the colored bracelets that traffickers would put on every illegal they brought into this country, and they were color-coded for how many thousands of dollars they owed them. And it was literally, they were treating human beings like cattle. And when you stand on the border down by the Rio Grande River, you see hundreds of these in the grass. And I asked him what the colored wristbands were, and his answer was, I have no idea. I've never seen them before. Which I got to admit made me really angry, because it means he hadn't bothered to go to the border at all. He did not care about the children being trafficked, and I view those colored wristbands as modern-day leg irons. This is slavery today in America, and the Democrats were responsible for it. And one of the most important things the Trump administration is doing is stopping this horrific abuse of kids that the Democrats allowed to have happen.
As always, thank you for listening to Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Ben Ferguson with you. Don't forget to download my podcast, and you can listen to my podcast every other day you're not listening to Verdict, or each day when you listen to Verdict afterwards. I'd love to have you as a listener to, again, the Ben Ferguson podcast, and we will see you back here on Monday morning.